Hello there. My name is Jonathan Friedman, and you are listening to FAQs by EHN Canada. This is a show where we scour the internet for the most frequently asked questions about a specific topic and ask an expert or somebody with lived experience for their thoughts, their experience with those questions. And today it's my pleasure to introduce our guest, Ian L. Ian, how are you doing today?
Jonathan, I'm very well. Thanks. Good morning. Good to be with you.
Before we jump into the five FAQs, the five facts, I'm wondering if you're able to share a little bit about yourself and your journey with our audience today.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks. So my name is Ian. I'm joining you from downtown Toronto, where I've lived off and on for the last 20 or so years. And I'm in my early 40s and am in recovery from drug and alcohol use a day at a time for the last 7.5 years.
That's amazing. One of the big things I hear whenever I get to talk to somebody in recovery is this whole one day at a time piece. 7.5 years is a long time. Congratulations. That's amazing. This one day at a time idea, has that changed for you from day one, day 10 to, I'm not going to do the math on 365 times 7.5, but to where you are today?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think I have a developing and improving sense of what that means day by day. I think when I was first exposed to that concept, when I was struggling with my drinking and drug use, I didn't really understand what it meant. I found it really frustrating. I didn't. I found it really, frankly, quite off-putting and reductive. And it's taken me a lot of one day at a times to grow my understanding, and that we take life a day at a time because that's how life comes, and that's true for everybody. I can't go to the gym 6 days a week next week. I can only go to the gym today, and if I do that, then there's a chance I can go for 2 days tomorrow. But just shrinking down life to the 24 hours that are in front of me is a simple concept, but that doesn't mean it's an easy one. And as I say, my relationship to that concept has definitely changed and evolved. And I was sort of deeply frustrated and suspicious by it early on, and I'm grateful that my understanding has changed. I found it to be a pretty effective way to live life.
So it's Pride Month, and recently we had the pleasure of releasing an episode here with a colleague of mine, actually, Danielle. And one of the conversations we had was talking about finding a safe space in therapy and in a therapeutic community. And today we're going to be talking about what that looks like from lived experience and from more of like the social world. And I'm really excited to get to jump into that with you today, Ian.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should have said at the top, I'm a gay man, and that's an important part of my identity and who I am. And I think intersects in complex and some interesting ways with my history with substance use. So I'm happy to dive into that with you today. And yeah, happy Pride.
Happy Pride. So we're going to start off with this. For people who are struggling, have struggled, or maybe starting to struggle, those spaces that have, like, hey, let's go to the bar and grab a drink, that's kind of feels safe and fun. Over time, it actually becomes less safe, less fun, and becomes this cycle that we know as potentially addiction. My question is, how do we distinguish between what is a safe space at that time versus what might start to be an unsafe space? And what do those safer spaces look like, especially in a big city like Toronto or during a time like Pride?
I think so. A lot of thoughts around that. I think that for me, sort of early in my recovery, I needed to just avoid places that were substance rich, just because I was looking to change, patterns of behavior that were like deeply seated over many years. So, and those were suggestions that I got through professionals. I had a number of experiences in treatment, like therapy, going to treatment facilities, but also from other people who who had gotten clean and sober, and that was just sort of good advice early on. And but yeah, I think you get at an interesting question, which is how do we, as queer people in recovery who have maybe had negative associations with spaces that queer spaces that are inherently sort of neutral, just because a place has a liquor license doesn't make it a problematic space. Uh, but then how do I re-engage as a different person, on who's living sober? How do I interact with those spaces? And there are, I think, some practical things that have been important for me, which I'll come back to in a second. But yeah, the thing about, I guess, just living in recovery is that the rest of the world doesn't change, right? I have people in my life who still, drink or take drugs. The liquor stores are all open. World Cup is happening here, and there's the party atmosphere layered onto that. There's all sorts of so how do I then, as somebody who's trying to live sober, continue to engage in a world where the world is not organized necessarily around my recovery? And so what that means for me is like behaving differently and like building what I can in my environments. And I'm grateful that in a big city like Toronto, I have a network of other LGBTQ plus folks who are in recovery and that I've met through a variety of different ways, including like 12-step recovery programs. And that gives me a group of people that I can be accountable to and for and with, and go out with. And we have, shared objectives about what a good night out means. And it's different from what that used to look like. And yeah, there's a great book called Living Sober, which is full of like really practical examples of like how to organize, oneself, going to a party or whether it's a pride event or a Christmas party or whatever, doesn't really matter. But it's full of like really practical ways to sort of safeguard and plan ahead. And yeah, we can tease that out if that's of interest a bit further. But yeah, it's about being accountable to myself and to other people about putting my recovery first and saying, okay, how then do I move through the world differently? Because like I said, the world isn't necessarily, reordering itself around me.
I think that's really interesting. The question was around what's a safe space, and the answer is spaces don't really change. Like they have their own, as you put it, objective. Like they want to do business and they want to sell more food, they want to sell more drinks, they want to keep that party atmosphere going. But what I think is really interesting about your answer is that a safe space is about who your community is and who your people are going into those spaces and what your objectives are. And maybe having some learning in context like that book you shared, like Living Sober. But a lot of it is about finding your community and being able to be safe and open with them.
Definitely. I think too, like what safety means has changed, right? And I think I was getting at that a bit when I said like early in my earliest of recoveries, right? There were places that just weren't safe for me because I was so early in my recovery and I was still trying to develop some of these muscles and these patterns. But I have, what safe means to me has changed because thankfully, my best thinking has gotten better over the weeks and months and years. And so there's this concept that says, like I can go anywhere I want, provided I have a good reason to be there. And good reason means different things. I was recently invited by somebody who doesn't know that I'm in recovery. I was recently invited to a wine tasting, and that's not a place that I need to be because the focus of that event is on, drinking. Now, if I want to go watch a game at a corner bar, if I've got a good reason to be there and I'm being honest about why I'm going and I connect with some people and let them know and I have a plan and I know where my exits are, and if I'm feeling overwhelmed, I can bail, then that's a very different kind of experience. So yeah, I think you're right to highlight that safety means different things at different times, and is inherently personal, but is something that I've got to be honest with myself and other people in my community about.
That's really interesting. And one thing that you mentioned that um, I wanna, as you put it, double click on is sort of this idea of a safety plan. So like, okay, there's a World Cup game. It's at a bar. You're going so you can have an objective of watching the game, of connecting with your friends. Um, but what does a plan for bailing or taking a break look like when you're out?
It's a great question, and that's where, yeah, those really practical things are helpful, and being clear with myself that I'm going for game, to watch the game, and that's the objective, and that'll be my focus. Recognizing going in that I'm going to be surrounded by other fans who are there for their own purposes, and well, for similar purposes, but maybe drinking a little bit, maybe drinking heavily, um, and that just being conscious of the fact that that's a space that I'm choosing to enter, and realizing that, like, I may be triggered around, this is a familiar experience where I used to, behave differently, and would be right there along, with the other, merrymakers, reveling in drink and soccer. So just preparing myself for that, and then also like really useful things like at a party or at or at a bar, having a drink so that I don't feel, quite, so I should say a non-alcoholic drink, ordering something, so that I've got a drink in my hand so that I don't have to worry about that. And that's a decision that I'm making quickly. And I don't feel quite so out of place because, I don't have a drink in my hand. And, it turns out that I thought a lot more about my drinking than, other people I was in the room with, and nobody's that interested if I'm, drinking a Coke Zero or some other, non-alcoholic option. Um, that just is, that takes that off the table, so that I'm, I have a plan as far as a drink order, and I might look to see, like what they offer before I go, so that I'm not, in a pinch there. And then again, like being honest with myself and saying that, like, if I'm getting overwhelmed, or if I'm feeling a compulsion to like take a drink, and I still absolutely occasionally will get like an urge to drink, or potentially to use, depending on the circumstances. If I need to leave that space, then realizing that that's a perfectly legitimate choice. And, I also used to bail on plans all the time. So like that's, for very different reasons, but the net effect was the same. So like being, again, really clear with like the people who I'm going with, that if I need to say like, guys, I need to bail, I'm sorry, this has been fun, but I'll catch up with you later. Um, having, having knowing myself well enough that that's the right choice for me, and I don't need to negotiate that with anybody else or with myself. Um, and those kinds of things, again, get easier with practice. It's also easier when I've got people in my community who, like me, are, for whatever reason, abstaining from substances. It's sort of easier to be in those places, and be in relationships with other people like that who have sort of shared outlooks. So that's, yeah, community is a big part of it.
I think that's really important. And I think you said something else too, where it's like having almost kind of like a roadmap for what's going to happen in a night, like going to watch a game. Okay. The server's going to come around, ask what drinks. Okay. I know what drink I want. I'm going to get a Coke Zero. Two, um, having the plan for, hey, this is a little overwhelming. I'm gonna take a break, or I'll catch up with you later, and have sort of being mentally prepared for all of the different things that come up during a night. So there's less anticipation and uncertainty.
Definitely. And I mean, it's funny, on the one hand, sort of the only planning I used to do before was, to make sure I had enough, or what I thought would be enough, dope or booze to get through an evening, and I didn't really care sort of where the evening took me or whose paths I might cross with. Like it was a quite a chaotic sort of. There wasn't a tremendous amount of planning. So that is sort of a new, or was a new and continues to be a new experience, which is thinking through things a little more intentionally. And again, that's just like a good way to live life. That's not some unique hack for people in recovery, but thinking through what you might encounter and how you might, it doesn't need to be obsessive, but so that I'm not sort of stunned if, something goes sideways, because I still don't have this ability to see around corners and I don't know, I can't predict everything that's going to happen. So some resiliency there around, putting myself first and yeah, hitting a timeout or just an exit plan if I need to.
And I feel like in most conversations around health, what be it on social media, in person, like everyone's kind of looking for the hack, but in a sense, like taking time to be prepared, whether it's a conversation about recovery, conversation about mental health, like if like being in a bar and being around like it's crowded, there's lots of noises, there's lots of things going on, like that kind of safety plan can work in a lot of different situations. And it's not a hack, it's just being prepared, practicing, seeing how it works one time. That was pretty good, but you know what? Um, I don't want to just know that I can leave. I want to know where I should leave to feel a little safer and a little better. Or I want to know I have these three people who I want to reach out to have a conversation to help transition out, and giving that a go.
Yeah, and I'm remembering a line in that book I mentioned, Living Sober, that was like it was even as practical as like if you drive, which I don't right now because I live in downtown Toronto, but like not parking in front of somebody so that you can't get your vehicle out of a driveway, right? So that like you're not stuck at a place if a holiday party goes long or whatever. And that's not the kind of stuff I ever would have thought about. So yeah, there is definitely like a fair amount of planning that can go into it. Again, it's you're not going to predict absolutely everything, but with a bit of guidance and a bit of help and bouncing stuff off of other people, right? Getting perspectives from other people can be super useful as well on everything from what to expect to how to manage it to when it's over, it's over.
So one thing you mentioned earlier, was the fear of ordering a Coke Zero. Um, to me, that's a conversation a bit around stigma. What does it look like when the server comes around and I order that? Will people judge me? Will they have a different opinion of me?
Yeah, it's funny. I had some experience working in service industry, and I would always be disappointed if somebody ordered, a soft drink because they probably were only going to have one, and then it was going to be the most inexpensive thing on the menu. So, like as a server, I was sort of disappointed by that, and maybe I carried that with me, like going forward, which is like you're looking for like large bar bills and, heavy drinkers were good tables, right? So that might be part of it for me, but I think too that like there are some interesting intersections with like my sexuality and stigma as it relates to like being in recovery or being a recovering alcoholic and drug addict, right? Which is like, who do I want to roll this information out to? How much does the person I'm talking to need to know? And it turns out like the person taking my drink order, like all they need to know is my drink order. They don't need to know my backstory about like my problematic relationship with bourbon, right? They just need my drink order, and I don't need to worry about their opinion of my drink order. They're there in a service capacity and, are all the way down the line. I've
All
never
they
had
need
an
to know is
issue.
that they give you a lime or not.
Yeah, right, right. Exactly. That's the biggest. Yes, that's right. And like every server I've ever had has been thoroughly professional and, never tried to push a different drink order on me because that's crazy. That's not how that works. But yeah, like worrying about like, am I doing this right? Am I moving through this space in a way that is that's expected of me? Uh, is if I'm at a bar, well, this is a bar, so I ought to be drinking. It's like, well, that's not entirely true, right? That's definitely why I went to bars before. And you know, bars have liquor licenses for the purpose of selling and serving alcohol. So to a degree, that's true. But like the whole thing isn't organized around me and isn't going to live or die based on um, you know, my drink order. So, it's sort of right sizing my ego a little bit and realizing that like not everything is about me, and this is a fairly simple transaction that like I can go through. But I think too, and I mentioned like my sexuality, like rolling out who I have sex with. That's not something that I do with every person I meet, right? And I've always blanched a little bit at like the expression in queer communities. This is like, oh, when did you come out? As if that's a one time thing, as if it's something that you do once and then you never do again, right? Like that's not the case. Like you start a new job, you meet somebody new, you are chatting with a neighbor, uh, you're talking to a therapist. You explain that like, oh, the person you're dating is male instead of female or whatever. Like there are all these different interactions where like I have to continue to resurface the fact that I'm gay. And I don't necessarily do that with every single, I don't take every single opportunity that presents itself because that's just how I choose to move through the world. And I make those assessments in real time based on, 1,000 factors. It's the same thing in recovery. Some people absolutely need to know that I don't drink or take drugs anymore. But how I roll that out, but some people don't because it doesn't come up as often as I thought it would. And how I roll that out is entirely contextually dependent. There are two sort of distinct components about who I am. They intersect at times, but they're not, definitional about who I am. So how and when I roll them out is, yeah, like I said, deeply contextual.
And it sounds like you're really mindful about that. How do you like, is there a practice that like, okay, I tried sharing a lot of my story with someone and I'm like, ah, that didn't feel good. Next time, like when I'm having more of a casual conversation, or just a conversation at work, these are three of the things that I might want to share, but these other things I'll save for someone else. What's the process of building the story that you want to tell in different situations?
I think process is the key for me, Jonathan. Like it is iterative, and I don't get everything right all the time. And I think while I sort of blanched a bit at this idea that I was going to have to keep coming out or keep disclosing, my sobriety, there's an opportunity there as well, which is I can refine, how I do it and where and in what ways, and um, that's actually a good thing. And I can get better at that, and I can reflect on that, and I can talk through with other people. And again, being a part of a community and bouncing stuff of ideas off of or experiences off of other people, like in the rooms of like 12-step programs, we talk pretty, we try and talk about our experience, our own experience, and roll that out and use that as a way to relate and identify with other people and maybe learn some lessons. But then we also talk about, strength and hope and other things. But that's a way to interrogate and assess, well, why do I think this happened? Which is not that different from uh, some of the principles that happen in like traditional therapy sessions. Obviously, they're different modalities for sure, but like the idea of checking in with myself, looking back, sort of trying to do it non-judgmentally and saying what worked there, what felt good, what was successful, what can I learn from this, what might I try and do differently. And again, that comes back to like that principle of like living a day at a time. Like I can't go back and undo that. If I'm willing to, engage with my life, I can maybe learn something from it so that tomorrow when I'm moving through the world, I can course correct or adjust or, continue to continue with what works.
In our conversation today, there's kind of been a lot of ideas and themes around trying it on in a very simple like analogy. I go to American Eagle and normally I wear black V-necks. Well, recently I saw this knit sweatshirt and I'm like, that's kind of interesting. And, I get hot really easily, but it seems to have good ventilation. Maybe I should try it on and try on a few different ones. Some have different buttons. Some have like that beach collar, which is a little wide. And I'm like, I don't like that. But the knit, it's kind of okay. So maybe I'll try that. I'll get one. But I'll still get, two of my V-necks because that's sort of my comfort. Distilling everything down, like it sounds like that's a big part of navigating social spaces. It's like trying it on with your community, trying it on with different safety plans. If you were to distill it down to sort of like your top few things to try on for people who might be having their first experience with recovery or being a little sober curious? What would be your tips? Where should they start?
Yeah, it's a great question. And uh, I think I love that analogy. I think a black V is a classic, and this should be a staple in most any wardrobe. And there's a place for knits and uh, different fabrics and textures. So good on you. I love that because I think there are things that work, right, and it's okay to keep going back to those when they work, and it's okay to deploy different things at different times when the circumstances warrant. I would say, and this is rooted in my experience in a 12-step recovery, but like part of this journey begins with being really honest and with oneself, right? Like, and for me, I think I knew I had a problem, but it was abundantly clear to a bunch of people around me before it was that clear to me. And I think part of that is just the nature of being impaired is I wasn't seeing things clearly, and it took a while, but eventually having to just grapple with the reality as it was and not deluding myself. The way that I was living was working for me. And so like there's a reason why like honesty is so important in the idea about a self-examined life, right? Like that's I think essential for to thrive as humans. And so just and it can be really difficult, right? Is to look really clearly at yourself and to grapple with what you see when that isn't always pretty, or it's something that you've spent time running away from. So that's really the foundation. And I think, and again, you hear it, or I hear it all the time in 12-step spaces, which is to keep coming back, right? Which is to keep trying, right? We always stumble, right? Nothing, I mean, it's like riding a bike, right? Like the first time we tried that, there were skin knees and tears, right? And there are emotional scars, and there's pain, and there's painful lessons. And just because we stumbled doesn't mean we failed. The idea is we get back up and we try again, and that that persistence and the humility to show up for yourself even after you've fallen short, is the difference, I think, between continuing to walk and pursue a path of recovery and staying stuck in a destructive cycle, my destructive cycle of substance use. And it's a wild ride, but I think persistence is what pays off. Yeah, that's not easy to hear because, again, like you said, right, people want hacks. I want hacks. I want shortcuts. I want things not now but right now. And that's not exactly how this life works. And so unsatisfying, but true.
So, if you're someone who is looking to explore a little bit more, it sounds like taking the time to try, to be persistent, and to know and experiment with what safety feels like, um, and to take time to reflect on it and say, is that something that worked for me? Is the other thing the thing that works a bit better for me? Write it down, take some time to talk to somebody, a professional, a non-professional, and that's kind of like the crux in where we start.
Absolutely. And I love that at the top of the pod you say that you talk to experts, and I think people with lived experience have expertise of their own. And um, yeah, I think accessing support is not always easy. It's not always fast. It's not always frictionless. But I think reaching out has to be is at the center is at the center of my recovery journey. I wasn't able, if I was able to do this on my own, I would have, and I tried, but it took what it took until it took, and it took me reaching out and finding support from other people, as you say, professionals, people with lived experience, all sorts. I mean, my journey was winding and took longer, has taken longer than I I would have realized at the beginning. So yeah, I would throw, some patience in there is also really important.
And I just want to take a moment to thank you for being here with me today, for your vulnerability, for your story and your experience. Um, we haven't actually done too many episodes where we focus and chat with people from a lived experience perspective, and I'm excited to do that a lot more. So, thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll talk soon.
Jonathan, thanks. It's been a slice. I really appreciate the conversation.